Everyone, and welcome to another casual stroll through Lord of the Rings Online. My name is Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards, and today we're continuing our series of explorations of the world of Lord of the Rings Online. Originally we started doing it by player vote, but now we're just kind of going through the regions chronological order, and we have Minas Morgul coming up for you today, as well as Torech Ungol. So before we go too deep into it, let me just head on over there. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with this stream, this is a world design focused stream where we talk about what goes into building the landscape of Middle-earth in Lord of the Rings Online. I am a senior world designer. I've been doing this for a very, very long time, and I am super happy to be hanging out with all of you here and talking about Lord of the Rings Online, talking about Minas Morgul specifically here. Things that I won't talk about, there are some stuff that I'm just not going to touch. I don't talk about things like class balance, PvMP, server performance. I'm not going to talk about anything about the upcoming new servers as well as the transfer process. We do have a FAQ out for that, I believe. That's available on the message board, so if you do have questions, feel free to drop into those postings and look and see if they answer your questions. And if they don't answer your questions, we have the message boards there for you to ask those questions on. And we've also got kind of the weekly Court of the Ring stream, which is an opportunity for you to ask those kinds of questions as well. And as you can see, Druid's Fire happily posted a link to the FAQ in the chat here on Twitch as well. So with that in mind, why don't we get things started? So we are here in the very entrance to Minas Morgul. Originally, this gate was here and it was blocked off. So this was closed off. You could not get past here when you were exploring Lingris, which is a region of Mordor, the very spider-infested region of Mordor. But you cross into here, the doors open, and now you are in Imlad Morgul. Minas Morgul, which we'll see coming up, was kind of the counterpart to Minas Tirith. And then over time, and it was acting as kind of the guardian city watching the borders of Mordor. And then over time, it itself fell to the evils on the other side of the border. But so we'll start our way off up in here. Minas Morgul was kind of a different sort of region for us to build because I don't think we've really built anything that was quite this heavily valleyed before. And that made for us to have to really kind of up our switchback game. As I go higher and higher up into here, you can kind of see the view down into the valley. We did want to have it be kind of depressing and forlorn as you are exploring around in here. And I think we nailed that fairly well, even though the terrain frills here, for example, are somewhat bright. I think it's important to have that sort of contrast on the landscape. It helps you kind of find your way around. And I think that's one of the things that regions like Mordor kind of struggled with, where it was very, very dark ground with very, very dark cliffs with very, very dark sky. So it made it somewhat difficult, at least in some areas, to kind of know where you were going, know how to navigate, because everything was just so dark. so dark. But yeah, so here we are in one of the overlooks. I think one of the things that's too is tricky about the content flow for this region is, we didn't hit you with a quest hub right as you crossed over the boundary into the region. And so you kind of had to traverse through the region a little bit. And I think sometimes that can be like a good way to get people to see the regions, but that can be tricky from a storytelling and content perspective where you're like running past all of these cool things that you see, and you might even like go off to the side to explore them, but then the actual content for them isn't available until you're further along in the region. And I think that's something that we're trying to work on to be better about as well, is the flow and the planning for a region as we're going through and exploring it. One of the things that we were really hoping for with this region and actually was hoping for it with Elder Slate and Elder Slate at War as well, but we didn't get it until much later on. Was to have the variable Z position stuff in our scene files. We did finally get it, and we started using it as part of our. Oh, hey, a little patch of green. That shouldn't be there. We did finally get it, and we started using it as part of what we were doing with Legacy of Morgoth's regions. I got to get down from here. For some reason, I had thought that there was another camp up here, but it's been a while since I've been in here. So we finally started using that in the newer regions that we've built, and if we weren't worried about those changes impacting landscape, we'd retrofit them, because this region was originally intended to use the variable Z positioning for scene assets. It didn't work, and because it didn't work, it just broke the scene files in client. It worked in World Builder fine. Our tools displayed it perfectly fine, but the problem we ran into is that the client didn't know how to represent what we were asking it to represent. And so because of that, it just kind of shrugged and threw up its hands and decided that it wasn't going to try to do it anymore. I think one of the, Druid's Fire says the overlook is so very good. I think that's one of the things that is really, how do I want to describe it? I think if there's any region in this game that is built for ample overlooks and cool valley views, this is definitely the region for that. There are multiple high points from which you can just get these really cool views, and we've got these strong anchor POIs, whether it's Minas Morgul itself or the surrounding mountains, that really help to showcase the landscape and provide some really, really beautiful silhouettes. And I think that's something that is, as we're like building landscape and whatnot, is always important to make sure that we have those silhouettes that you can see in the distance that act as your wayfinding through a space. And that's why having the contrast in the colors of the terrain and having contrast in the sky against the terrain helps to pull those elements out and make them visible. My fresh admin character going through and getting all of the deeds as we run through. So this was another cool intentional view where we wanted to show you a different angle on Minas Morgul itself, and then death should you decide to jump off. We'll come back to Gorthad Nur later on if we have time to go through dungeons, because that's one of the instance spaces for this particular region. So now I got to run back down. I think one of the things that is tricky about this region, though, is because it is this narrow valley, there is a lot of player back and forth where they have to, proceed in a little bit, get their content, go out, come back, go out, maybe backtrack here and there. In the distance there, you can see Torech Ungol. All right, I am trying to remember my way around this region, but sometimes you just gotta rocket jump. All right, that's how we do it. I think one of the things too that's tricky about this region is like our camera, we have a lot of steep hills, steep mountains in this region, and the camera doesn't always play nice with steep angles, especially with it being so variable. Like players can put their camera kind of wherever they want to, and that makes it hard for us to account for where the camera is going to be as a player is moving through a region. All right, this is the camp that I thought I was going to. um, the Morgul camp, as well as the entrance to the Filthwell, the Ethel Guar. One of the things that I like about this camp is it gives you that view, talking about the, lookout points and whatnot. Like, this gives you kind of a view over where you've come from, the regions you've been. You get to see Lingris in a way that you haven't seen it before, right? Like, because this gets up here pretty high, if I remember right. I think this camp winds back and forth pretty high up into the mountains. I think one of the things too that would make all of these switchbacks and whatnot a little bit easier on us to make is if our terrain was a little bit higher fidelity. Right now, the terrain mesh is it does what it needs to do, and can present interesting looking landscapes at a like broad brushstroke level, but super fine, high detail landscapes. It's a little hard to do those with this terrain when there's only so many vertices for it, right? Like you can even see here, where the edges of the landscape exist. Let me see if I can get a good angle without, but you can even see here, like those are that point to that point. That's the terrain mesh, and a lot of more modern games have a much denser mesh in their terrain. And so that's one of the things that we have to really work around with our tools, is finding ways to make those things work as best we can. And it's like when you're doing a home improvement project kind of thing, and like you see the mistakes. You see where the drywall isn't exactly perfect. You see where the the paint might have dripped a little bit. But if you just take a step back and try not to focus on those little details, you're like, okay, this still looks good. It achieves what it needs to achieve, even though, it's not the most latest, greatest, highest fidelity thing out there. I do like this pass down through here, because this feels a lot more gentle. But the problem is building like a gentle switchback like this, compared to like the path up to Lindleby, for example. But this more gentle switchback like takes a lot of space to build. Whereas Lindleby was pretty aggressive in terms of the amount of terrain that it covered. But I think one of the things too that I think this is probably one of the last regions where we did this, where we have the entire world team kind of all working in the landscape all at the same time. So there's a single region, very complex landscape, and always it's a little like this kind of landscape is always a little tricky to work in without tripping over each other. How close can we work together without eating up each other's files in Perforce, like that sort of thing. With our more recent offerings, things like Gundabad and Corsairs of Mumbar, certainly, like instead of taking a single region and dividing it up amongst ourselves and kind of working all in it in tandem, we've been more inclined to assign a single like big bucket of stuff to individual world designers to handle. So like, I did Amberol and Urashtar, and all of the instance spaces for Legacy and Morgoth, and one of our other designers took Kudzagin and one took Imular. So we tend to do like bigger buckets as opposed to spreading the workload out across the entire team, to build like kind of in a conveyor belt sort of way. So let's work our way up the mountain now. We'll head back down this way once we get through Thuringwath, because I kind of want to progress through the region even though it's not progressing through the region in the where am I? Kirith Ungol. Yeah. I want to kind of progress through the region physically as opposed to trying to follow where the storyline is going through it, because I'll be honest, I don't remember all the different directions the storyline took to get where it needs to go in the region. So it's a little bit easier to just be like, I'm going to follow this road until I can't follow it anymore, and then I'll back out. All right, well, while I'm doing that, let's see if there are any other questions we have going on. Mr. Alex says, we don't always want supermassive landscapes, but little valleys like Imlad Morgul with small, thin roads around mountains is working very well, like Carbronock also. Yeah, and I think stuff like that is definitely something that has its place here and there. And we try to like balance it out, right? I think one of the things that is challenging for us in general is deciding what to offer for landscape and making sure that what we're offering is competitive with our other offerings, right? Like, trying to, because this expansion pack had, Minas Morgul, it had Mordor Besieged, it had a lot of stuff going on with it. Where am I? All right. And, I think for an update, a single region is something that's really like viable and doable. But for an expansion pack, we usually want to have a little bit more in it. Spooky, gloomy. And we step out, and we are in the Vale of Thuringwath. I know the designer that built this had a lot of fun kind of building something that was so starkly different from what the rest of the region represented, and acting as kind of a more corrupted and evil counterpart to things like the Old Forest or Fangorn Forest, right? Like, this was meant to be evil magical Old Forest or evil magical Fangorn, and I think the trees just nail it right. The look and feel, the fog, just like it does a lot of work to pull that feel off in here. I think one of the things too that really makes it stand out as a region compared to those other forests is a lot of those forests you feel very hemmed in by the forest. Like, we tend to go with closer fog. We tend to go with darker fog and darker lighting. Like Mirkwood, northern Mirkwood, for example, is a very, very oppressive forest space. And while I think Thuringwath is similarly dense as far as the amount of trees and foliage and whatnot, the canopy kind of obstructing your view, I think the difference is because it's so much brighter, it doesn't feel as closed in around you as those other regions did. We come up to the Dire Span, and leading into one of our final dungeon spaces as well for the expansion pack. Bar Nirniaeth, the Houses of Lamentation. All right, I'm gonna, because that was a long haul, I'm going to teleport back to the entrance of everything. Jason B says, any plans to update the engine for higher fidelity? I think it's funny. I made kind of a joking comment to one of our designers, to Orion, where I was just like, I think it was to Orion, where I'm just like, I'm trying to AAA as hard as I can with this engine. I think we are we are doing what we can over time to find ways here and there to implement new systems and new features into the engine that will help kind of modernize it, taking some new approaches to how we're developing our landscapes, to how we are making assets and whatnot. So I think it is much more of a piecemeal kind of approach. It is not the wholesale like let's completely revamp the game, revamp the engine sort of thing. It is much more of a where can we find the little features here and there that are going to improve the quality of life of the game, improve the visual fidelity of the game, without impacting the game in a way that is negative. That's the direction we want to go. That's how we want to go with those kind of more thoughtful adjustments to things. I think we're learning as we go through that whole process. There are some things that as we're working on them, we're like, okay, that didn't work in the way that we were wanting or hoping for it to. So I think we don't have really the luxury of how do I want to say this? We don't have the luxury of just like scrubbing the game, bringing it down to its bare bones and building it back up again. That's not a realistic use of our available time and efforts, right? So we need to be careful and thoughtful about those kinds of things that we do decide to make as upgrades, because there is a lot of nostalgia also for the way things used to be, the way things that are now, right? And it's this balancing act of what improvements do we make to improve the look and feel of the game so that new players might be interested in it, as well as maintain the nostalgic qualities of the game that our current players may really, really enjoy and really appreciate. Um, have yet another stunning view of Minas Morgul from here. Um, Thankfully, there are not multiple copies of Minas Morgul. I think there's only one copy of it, and it's only a partial copy um, that was used for one of the instances. They just the designer wanted to make sure that there was basically a space that they could work in that wouldn't be tampered with. So over here we do have the entrance from Ithilien, and this is from post-Pelennor Ithilien, I believe. Um, it's closed off in other versions of Ithilien. One of the things that I do wish we had a way of doing better is blending our day files, because right now, like you can see, we're in Ithilien, so we're being affected by the Ithilien day file, and then we cross over into Imlad Morgul, and then it switches over. And it would be really nice if we had a good way to kind of like blend the sky, so it's like, oh, half of it is Minas Morgul sky, Imlad Morgul sky, half of it is Ithilien sky, so that you can look off into the distance and things still feel like they are being lit in the way that they should be lit. Druid's Fire says, can't wait for Corey to eventually get to these areas on his completionist or field trip character so that he can really dig into the architecture. I think one of the things that regularly comes up whenever we move around through the game, introducing new regions and whatnot, is there's usually always someone that has a comment of, like, why are you using this rock still? Why are you using that building still? And some of it is certainly for purposes of saving ourselves development costs, but also I think it's easy to forget how big some of the kingdoms in this game actually are, right? Like Gondor and Numenor had such a massive impact on the landscape of Middle Earth that seeing that architecture scattered throughout the majority of the playable space, hints of it here and there, whether you're in Arnor or Evendim, in Foreshell, if you are all the way down in Cape of Umbar, like seeing those influences of that architecture makes sense. It makes sense that you would see those things because it's it's a big kingdom that covers a lot of ground. Um, and similarly with dwarf architecture and whatnot as well. The dwarves started their civilization kind of in a centralized spot, and they kind of grew out from there. It wasn't like dwarf kingdoms were popping up here and there. It all has a source, and then that source kind of grows out from there. So you have this base architectural language that then receives influence by the individual kingdoms as they kind of grow and establish their own cultures. That's why when we introduced the Temamir, the Temamir? No, the Jelruka. Temamir is what we're working with now as our current representative dwarf race or dwarf kingdom. But the Jelruka have a slightly different look to some of the more decorative elements of their architecture, and that's intentional. We want to show that off, but we also want to make sure that from the development side of things that we are able to easily use the architecture. We have a familiar usage pattern with dwarf architecture, so it makes sense for a lot of that architecture to be similar. And also because we want to be able to kind of represent a consistent look for a culture. So, Renee Killer says, I always wondered if this area was actually finished and a big forest but barely any quests. So, Thuringwath was an area that I think we had intended it to be a bigger, more important region than it ended up being. It was meant to be a fully fleshed out area. Unfortunately, we had a designer take a job offer that they couldn't refuse. Right? Like it's hard to you get a dream job that falls across your plate, and it's hard to say no to it. So they received another job offer, and that kind of left us in a spot where we had to decide, like, okay, we need to kind of maybe retask some things. We weren't necessarily going to be able to backfill for that departure and get that new hire trained up fast enough to really have an impact on that piece of content. So I think we made the tough decision to kind of make that portion of Imlad Morgul a little bit less extensive. And don't begrudge people for having those awesome opportunities come across their laps, right? Like, you want anyone that you're working with to be doing something that they love and enjoy, and when you get a chance to work on something that is like your ideal, I would work on this all day, every day kind of thing, you got to take it, right? Mario Justin says, I really enjoy how you managed to keep various evil areas visually and aesthetically distinct and fresh over the years. Haven't been here myself yet, but the colors look really unique compared to something like Angmar. I think that's one of the challenges, because it is especially with the visuals of things like the movies and what the Nazgul looks like. It's really easy to fall into a single interpretation of what evil looks like, of what badness looks like, those sorts of things. It's really easy to fall into that. Black, edgy, spiky armor, glowing red eyes, like that is a classical visual language for what is evil. I loved here that Atli Spiderbane makes a reappearance. I know he appears in Lingris as well, but it's just kind of fun to see those characters that your character grew up with showing up in later portions of the game. Spoilers for anyone who has not been to this region. We have Atli Spiderbane from Archet here. But yeah, so back to the conversation about good and evil. It can be really hard to not just fall into the trap of, everything evil is black and spiky with red glowing eyes and whatnot. And it's up to us to really try to define new ways to talk about evilness, to represent it. I think luckily we had things like Shelob and we had the Ungoladine as an opportunity here to kind of mix up and provide a break from the classic, Orcs and Angmar style badness. And I think the glowing of Minas Morgul itself helps establish it as something that is different and distinct from the other kind of, basically distinct from Mordor on the other side. And that was something that we were very intentional about as well. Like, we knew this was going to be another evil region, evil things afoot, all of that. So we needed to have a way to represent that evilness that wasn't something that would burn people out, would tire people out. I think regions like this do a fairly good job of exhausting people if they are in them for too long, if they don't have some sort of visual thematic breaks that happen. So having things like, where am I going? Here we go. So having things like Thuringloth, having things like a glowy city and whatnot, those can all do great things when it comes to changing that stuff up. Here we are on the path from heading into Torech Ungol. We're not going to go in here quite yet because we still have more of the region to look at, and I'm moving as quickly as we can through the region because the dungeons in this expansion were really, really cool. Not that I'm tooting my own horn or anything, but I did build a bunch of them, and I think we were able to. I think we experimented a bit more with lighting in these regions than we had in typical other dungeons. Let me hop down, get another cool view of things, and then we'll see if there are any more questions in chat. Also, if I've been talking a while and I have not had a drink of water or anything, please, please, please remind me to take a drink so that I don't just destroy my voice while doing this whole stream. Let me get to a good viewpoint of... Here we go. We're going to be heading over there next. All right. Let's see. So Lost Shire Hobbit says, first time I saw Minas Morgul was another WoW moment, and it had moon vibes, but corrupted moon vibes. At least for me it does. Was there an idea to link it back to Minas Ithil at all? I think so, because I think there's the Tower of the Sun in Minas Tirith, and the Tower of the Moon here in Minas Morgul, Imlad Morgul. So they are very intentionally like sister cities, right? They are meant to be reflections of each other. Both of them were meant to be guardians over their respective territories, and unfortunately, this one failed. It fell, and so that makes it that makes the cities themselves characters that you can tell stories about. I've always talked about how the landscape is a character with its own story, and it's up to us to tell that story as we are developing the landscape. And I think the Minas Morgul versus Minas Tirith kind of juxtaposition um, is a really effective story. Um, it shows that, had the Battle of Pelennor Fields not gone the way it had, that Minas Tirith could have become something like Minas Morgul or Minas Ithil. Leirian says, I can't work at SSG. I wouldn't leave the office. It's like, not to be too facetious, but it is kind of funny. Working from home, it's actually something that I have to be very mindful about when it comes to work. I think all of us do have to make sure that we are very sure and making sure that we take time to leave the house. Right? Like otherwise, it's really easy to just be at work all the time. And so, like for me, that comes in the form of making sure I have time in my day to run errands, making sure I have time in my day to go to the gym, because like I think as frustrating as traffic is or can be, one of the benefits of going to the office is it does kind of break up your day. It does kind of make you leave the house. I mean, it definitely makes you leave the house, and it makes you have to have some variety in what your day-to-day experience is. And work from home is a little bit more challenging to achieve that, but it's no less important to make sure that you have those like breaks and opportunities to leave the house and to just get outside. Uh, Druid's Fire says evil looks pretty dang hot with the rings of power. Um, I think again that's another interpretation of evil, right? Like I think Antheron is a charismatic but ultimately controlling interpretation of evil, right? Like the intention of that character is to whisper those sweet, sweet words to you and convince you to do the things that in the back of your head you're probably kind of like, this doesn't really seem like the right thing to do, but then you do it anyways because dang that Antheron, he is just so compelling in his argument, right? So there's those many shades of evil in the world. As we run around here, I feel like I'm running fast, a little bit faster than I probably should. I can probably slow it down a little bit. The only reason why I note that is because all of a sudden the lighting on the floor went away. And that usually means that I have more light sources loaded than I should because I've just been zipping around pretty quickly. Druid's Fire also says, I love the continuity of using early game NPCs in later game content. The 18 years of story continuity is chef's kiss. And yeah, I think that's something, honestly, that is kind of like intriguing and interesting for me when thinking about doing things like fill in the gap regions. Like, where can we have, or something like, not even just fill in the gaps, but something like Before the Shadows, where like what story threads do we kind of have wiggle room to introduce new elements to existing stories, right? Introduce new elements to existing characters. Fill in where those characters might have been. That's what we did with Boromir for Before the Shadow. And I think that helps give us a little bit of extra longevity. I know players really, really like the concept of the. What are you? Oh, you're just a Morval floating around up there. People really like the concept of the further adventures too, right? Because it gives you that little bit more story on characters that you had previously interacted with. And I think that's a good way to, to fill out or to even just like give old characters something new to do at points of time where we knew those characters have like downtime. We know Bilbo is hanging out in Rivendell basically for the rest of the book series, up until the very end. So, like, why not find things for him to do while that's happening? It plays with the chronology of the game a little bit. It makes it a little tricky um, to fit some of those things into the ongoing narrative. But like, oh hey, you're in Rivendell, and Rivendell's supposed to be set in this time of day, but the further or time of year, but further adventures is for Bilbo that is maybe set in a different time, or Elladan and Elro here are set in different times. So let's see. So Bazek Zefugs says, why is it now often the case that we cannot walk on city walls anymore? I always get sad when I cannot patrol them for a nice view. Often it's to prevent stuck spots, right? Like it is, we I think a lot of our designers have different mentalities on design, and you can see that over the course of the game where different people have been in charge of different regions and they've approached how things like physics and impassables and whatnot work differently. So, like, you go to Gondor, for example. So, let's see. Boop, boop, boop. Gondor. Western Gondor. So, Morlad, for example. This is something that sticks out in my head. Has a lot of physics in it that keep you from, like, jumping over fences and down hills and whatnot. And that's a decision that the designer made for it, and I presume those decisions were made in the interest of preventing stuck spots, right? So if we make something a little bit less physically complex, it helps, and a little bit more restrictive in terms of where you can go. It helps us avoid situations where we have to, in addition to building out the space, then also very highly detailed build out spaces that we're not expecting players to get to all that often, because then we start getting bugs, and then if a particular like path around up onto the roofs of Breland becomes super popular, then we get a bombardment of stuck spots, and it's sometimes just easier to put up a wall than to chase down the like 40 new stuck spots that this discovery has resulted in. So, we have to be economic in our time when we're working on things in order to keep ourselves from burning ourselves out on fixing all of those little things. Like I said, a wall of physics can fix a multitude of problems as opposed to us going from spot to spot to spot and fixing each individual spot in an area that we're never intending for players to ever actually get to anyways. Mr. Alex13P says, can you tone down the cricket sound in the game? That sound is killing my ears in some cases. I would suggest filing a bug on that and see if that's something where we can have our sound designer look at it and tone it down. Otherwise, too, I think you should be able to filter it out using the sound filtering system, or just the asset filtering system, because that works on things like effects and sound and whatnot. Mandalaire says, how much input do you have in ambient sounds for certain parts of the game, of the landscape? I ask because the horrible screaming at the very top of the city is, well, I mean, you or the sound effects team or whoever absolutely nailed it. I think a lot of that ends up landing on our sound designer and Bill Champagne. He'll take a look at a space and kind of think about what things make sense to go into the ambience for here. There are some things like, I think these assets in particular have a certain sound built into them that is very loud and can be very loud. And especially when you have multiples of them placed around. So you've got that one placed here, you've got that one placed there. So you're getting multiple instances of those sounds, and those stack up and get louder and louder and louder too. So yeah, I would say if there are some spots where certain sound effects are feeling like they're overbearingly loud, those are certainly places that are worthwhile to submit a bug on so that we can go in and investigate and try to solve. Alrighty. Well, so we've explored through the landscapes. So now let's head into some of the dungeon spaces. Let's see. So before I jump in there, says Lyron 1986 says scenario. You spoke of this expansion losing an SSG employee that impacted Thuringwath development. Prior to Corsairs of Umbar release, there were departures that impacted development. Has SSG changed anything from these experiences to mitigate the impact of departures that may unfortunately happen? I think anyone leaving a team leaves a gap in the team, whether that is a gap in productivity, a gap in knowledge. You know, losing a team member always has an impact on a team. I think it's really helpful to have individual design methods that can help determine what is higher priority, what's lesser priority, and kind of tier out how things are developed. Like my approach to building landscape, for example, is a very tiered approach to building out the landscape, where I will do, broad strokes of everything of a certain tier first. I will, if I'm building out a region, I do the height map first, and then I focus on textures and scene files. Then I do a pass that's on like roads and hubs, and then I do a pass that's on camps, so that it's like very staged out, so that it's not like, oh, hi, you just walked in front of me. How you doing? So I think those kinds of thought processes, while a designer is working on their plan and scoping and speccing, can really help. They won't resolve those issues that come from the departure of a team member, but they can help kind of better position a team to know what is left to do, right? And to know, like, okay, these are the high priority things that were left on this person's plate. These are the, medium priority. These were the low priority. And that can kind of help everyone better figure out who should be tasked with what and how we can help out and what things just need to be cut. I think that's one of the things that we as a company really struggled with for a while, was our ambitions kind of led us to, I shouldn't be in here. Our ambitions kind of led us to put ourselves in positions where everything was viewed as an important and necessary thing for what we were making. There was a lot of like interdependency on things, and I think we've kind of tried to move away from that so that we can better chunk out, what the priority things are. Keezy Bun 33 says, how hard would it be to make a set unstuck point command to unstuck to if you do get stuck anywhere? I think I'm not sure exactly where unstuck sends you now, but it is a data-driven location based off of where you are to get you to an unstuck location. I don't remember if it sends you back to your player starting point or if it sends you back to the defeat circle that is in the location you are, because I haven't used it all that much as a tool. I think allowing players to define it turns it into basically just another travel option for players if they can pick where they want it to go. And I think that isn't great. There's already a plethora of ways to get around the world, and I would be hesitant to then also change the functionality of Unstuck in a way that players would just look at it and consider it another travel tool. Alrighty. All right, we got a little bit of time left, so let's start digging into. Oh wait, we still have to do Torech Ungol real quick. So we'll do that real quick, and then we'll go into dungeon interiors. I had a lot of fun building Torech Ungol. It'd been a while since I'd done this kind of more claustrophobic dual height map space. A lot of our caves tend to like broaden out pretty quickly. You know, big open caves, so that it really ends up being more just like normal landscape, just with a roof. And so when I was building Torech Ungol, I really wanted to push it in a direction that made it feel more like it was a smaller actual like series of caves burrowed out. Um, and so that was the design intention here. It's a little bit claustrophobic. It's closed in. I don't remember if we had a map. We do have a map. Good. Um, you know, it is intentionally just kind of. It's a smaller region, sub-region of Imlad Morgul, but it was something that we really wanted to make sure that we had in here, both for storytelling purposes and to just really connect this landscape with other landscapes that had already been built. So, yep, here we go. I think this is coming up on the main entrance up here. But this is one of the spaces too that we did one of the rare times where we take camera control out of player's hands with Shelob vision, right? Like, you know, um, I really like it when we do something like that in a limited fashion. I know when we launched the game, I think one of the things that was like something that we considered a feather in our cap was that we didn't take control of your character during storytelling beats, right? Like, it was either all something that was happening all at once in world, or it was um, something that happened, you know, through text. And there were a few points where we wanted to be a little bit more cinematic throughout the game, and I think it's really interesting to see those points crop up here and there. I think it's fun to see those opportunities for something that is a little bit different from the camera perspective crop up. All right, and here we are, the entrance to Remerkant. All right, let's pop into some dungeons. We've got a few minutes left. I think I started a minute or two late, so I might go over just slightly. But so here you can see what we were talking about, playing a little bit more with lighting, you know, using the specular highlights from the lights here to cast a color that is very different than the light that is actually used in the space. I think doing stuff like that too can often lead to a space feeling unsettling, right? Like, you know, if you in here, for example, you have these red fires going on, and so you kind of expect red, smoky, but as you're in here, you see it's more like it's purple, and that just feels weird. It throws you off, and I think that's a really effective way to make people feel uncomfortable in a space. Is you throw in a color that is not expected for the character of a space. I know I did that. You know, there was a dungeon in Ironfold. Did I spell it wrong? There we go. Where it was like a blue light with bright red specular highlights, and that really just helped emphasize the awfulness of the pedestal that you were running up on. All right, let's see if there are any other questions while I go through here. So this is one of our instance spaces, I believe. I think this was an interesting, yeah. So this was an interesting instance space too, because while there's some variety in the bosses that you encounter here in this specific space, the there was intended to be a greater variety of enemies. Alright. I just got a notification that I've got another meeting starting very soon, so I'm going to speed run through a few more of these cool places before we call it. But yeah, I think like when we were talking about the archives, it was one of those spaces where like, oh, there are so many different like cool things that we could be doing in here. We could have, introduce a new boss every update kind of thing. And the idea that those bosses are like different flavored versions of boss encounters that you've already had previously. That was a really like compelling hook for us as we were working out the space. And like a lot of ambitions, time gets away from us, and we weren't able to achieve that kind of thing with regularity. But I really like building this space. I just like having the clutter, the messy feel of it. All right, let's go to Filthwell. Major lag 817, no cave troll. So we have a cave troll is happening next week. It is the second Thursday of every month at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We are just wrapping up our casual stroll in which I blitz through these instance spaces as fast as I possibly can. This space, the Filthwell, I had originally envisioned it as a very randomized path through, where the idea being is each load up of the instance, you get a different path through the space. And I think I don't remember if that is implemented in a very limited fashion, but that was kind of the high level idea is as you're trying to work your way to the bosses, each time you go through, the path might be a little different. This was a fun space to build, especially since it's so grody. So very grody. And then we have our final encounter space. So Lyron, 1986, says, this expansion had many endgame instances. What determines the quantity of those instances in an expansion? I feel that future expansions after Minas Morgul have been a little less on instances, and just wondering how that process works. It usually comes down to what we have time to make and what our player base seems to be interested in and reacting to at the time that we're working on it. So, I think, well, this is another version. This interior, the designer was like, I want 3 different versions of this space. So this is one of the versions. I called it Pub of the Dead. And for our last one, before I wrap up this one, so yeah, it really depends on what designers want to do and what we think the player base is feeling like. What they might want to play at a given time. I think with the with the stuff we did for Legacy of Morgoth, we intentionally had fewer three-person instances because, those can actually be harder to build and balance, because with only three people, it's harder to know who all is in the group. So that means that you need to kind of maybe make it a little bit easier, but if it's too easy, then people won't kind of come back to it for challenge content purposes. But then if you make it too hard, then it kind of forces you to only be able to run it with a certain optimized loadout of characters. So, but alrighty, everyone. Well, with that question, I think I'm going to wrap up all of this. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out here for this stream. So next week, like I mentioned, we are doing our We Have a Cave Troll stream with Orion, Alan Mackey. Our topic is just going to be a general Q&A. The biggest thing that we want to kind of avoid talking about is we're probably not going to answer many or any questions in regards to character transfers or the new servers, because we do have a plethora of information out for that. I think the raid for Legacy of Morgoth is currently available on preview on Bullroar. I don't know if Bullroar is up or down right now, but the intention is to have a couple more Bullroar previews of that before it goes on to the live servers. I know we have other patches coming up too, and before we know it, Update 43 will be right around the corner. So yeah, I think that's everything I've got for you all. So thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, great afternoon, great day, wherever you are in the world. Court of the Rings is our usual Friday stream, though it sounds like Cord will not be available to run it this Friday, but that's our usual time. So if there are questions that you wanted to have asked and weren't able to get answered here in this stream or in our stream with Orion next week, feel free to drop into one of those or drop into the message boards. I think the Discord server is due out fairly soon as well. I don't know if a date has been announced for that, but I know behind the scenes a lot of work has been going on there with getting it prepared too. So lots of great, exciting things coming up. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon, and we will chat with you all next week.